Hello and welcome to Eye Openers. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, wherever you're at. Some people it's morning, some people it's afternoon, evening, whatever. It doesn't matter as long as you are still drinking your coffee. So good morning and thank you for being here with us, Saar.
Thank you for having
Where are
me.
you joining us from today?
So I live in Tyson's Corner, which is just outside of Washington, D.C.
Awesome. And are you guys in the snow right now or not so much?
There's some snow outside. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, so this doesn't look like much to me. But for some reason, the area is shut down. So it's interesting to see how different areas don't have infrastructure for different weather.
Totally. We just moved out of Providence, Rhode Island. And so I'm still getting all the alerts for snow warning, whatever, but I'm no longer in the snow. Don't know if I necessarily miss it. So
I don't enjoy it. So.
So tell me, on this show, the first thing we do is coffee, of course, because without it, nothing else happens. And I got a special delivery this morning from my husband. Handlebar Coffee in Santa Barbara is kind of like the well-known spot you got to go to and definitely check out if you're in town. So
next time in the area.
Yeah. And what about for you? You have a specialty coffee going on over there.
Yeah, so I have my own espresso machine. So I made myself a cortado. So it's 2 ounces espresso, 2 ounces steamed milk. So put together. So the beans are from Klatch Coffee Roasters, which I think is out closer to you. And the milk is whole milk. So yeah, I'm not.
I love the detail.
Yeah.
Very good. Yes. So tell me, how do you get onto a cortado? Because it's like a specialty drink there. I'm always curious about, I am an auto drip, or pour over kind of girl. I just like a big.
Yeah. I got into coffee roughly 5-6 years ago. I mean, I was drinking coffee, but not to the extent that I got into sort of specialty coffee until maybe 5-6 years ago. Started out with a mocha pot and a grinder. So just kind of learning how to do that. And from there, it evolved into an entry-level espresso machine, which then evolved into this higher level espresso machine. But started to kind of learn, mess with technique, and got to the point where I can make basically any espresso beverage, even espresso straight up, extract the most flavor out of it that I'm able to at this point. There's other baristas, obviously, who are more talented, but learn from them as much as I can, and then got to this point. So, I mean, start out with the latte because that's got the most milk, and then eventually you come down to the flat white, and then you get down to the cortado. I never did the cappuccino because steaming the milk for that's really annoying. So that's the other thing.
Yes, I definitely order a cappuccino when I'm out because I don't want to make it.
Yeah, just try a cortado. It's the same thing without all the foam.
Okay. I've got to try this then. I've definitely had them, but yeah, I think I haven't put the time and energy into figuring out how to extract the most flavor. But this is why I love this show, because I get a bunch of smart people on here and they tell me, well, you just treat this like a science, just like everything else, and get real into it. So that's what I love about my guests, that you guys take everything, you really want to nail it down and extract the most out of everything.
That's what you kind of have to do if you want to push it to the next level. So
that's right, push it to the next level, which brings me to giving you a proper introduction so people actually know who I'm talking to. So Saar, you're currently the CEO of Banjo, which is an innovative health tech company that uses AI to enhance decision making around the different decisions that pharmacies and pre-authorizations required in healthcare services. How did I do?
You did pretty good. So we don't do the pharmacy side. We do the payer portion, but we're all focused on the drug. Okay. So you had the right vertical or sub-vertical, the wrong party, but that's okay because you still have to deal with providers and payers. Prior authorization is a huge challenge in the industry. It's costing the U.S. healthcare system somewhere around $70 billion a year. And it's simply because exactly what you're alluding to, making decisions on this is hard. And it's because we're making decisions that involve people's lives, as well as very, very high cost medications. And a lot of folks struggle with, well, why isn't the payer just approving my medication? My doctor said it's the right one for me. So why is the payer saying this? And a lot of doctors struggle with, well, why is the payer questioning my medical integrity? The truth of the matter is that there's a lot of work that goes into developing prior auth criteria. The process around enforcing it is what's broken. And that's what we're working on fixing, is how do we get this to be a more collaborative process? How do we make sure we're analyzing the right things and getting patients the appropriate care they need in a timely fashion?
Right. So one huge reason why I wanted to have you on is because of I've dealt with this personally, both on a provider side and as a patient, and it is mind blowing to me as somebody with resources, education, experience in this exact industry, that how challenging it is to get your needs met, and how strangely subjective it can be. And I was so excited to come across Banjo, and you in particular, to hear, just to know that you and your team are behind this and working on this, because I know how many people are impacted in this broken system.
Oh yeah, there's 500 million prior auths every single year. So if you take a look at the US population, roughly 350 million, that's at least one prior authorization plus per person. So it's a massive problem, and it's affecting the entirety of the specialty drug space, which in its own is a growing close to $300 billion space, the fastest growing area of medicine. So you think about it, all $300 billion are touched by a prior authorization. Then you add procedures, imaging, lab. This is a very large chunk of the US healthcare economy. And it's painful because this is your most sick patients are being affected by the prior auth process. And it can be disheartening for them, and can be painful for them, and is infuriating for providers, and is also challenging for payers. So it's a problem, but we're excited by problems at Banjo Health.
Awesome. I love that kind of attitude. So tell us a little bit about your background, because you haven't done this forever. So what brought you to the point?
Yeah, so we started the company about 2.5 years ago. Prior to that, if we just go to the beginning, I'm not a clinician by training. I'm not a technologist by training. I got my law degree, my master's in business at Ohio State. From there, went over to investment banking. From investment banking, got pulled into a startup called RX Advance, which is a pharmacy benefit management startup. Was brought there as one of the first 20 employees. And they asked me, hey, go figure out fundraising. And when we got the fundraising figured out, they threw me onto any of the challenging areas of the business. And it was hard. It was a great learning, and it's how I really got great exposure to the challenges in the PBM space. About 3 years into being at that company, they had a great transaction with one of the nation's largest managed Medicaid plans, Centene, and I was in charge of leading that diligence process. There's a few other companies that were taking a look at RX Advance as part of that transaction. All of them had asked something along the lines of, what does RX Advance do differently on prior authorization? The investment banker in me was, found that curious, because these are all Fortune 50 companies. Yeah. And if Fortune 50 companies, you think they'd have best and brightest practices. So why are they all asking this question? And just recently, Cover My Meds had sold to McKesson for $1.5 billion. So this prior authorization process should be mostly fixed, right? There's a $1.5 billion company there. So something happened. The truth of the matter is, when you got into when we got to Centene, I saw a very challenging process for them, in that they were only doing about 50% of their PA volume. The rest was being either done by some of their vendors like MRIOA or CVS. And so there's got to be a better way, because if all these prior auths are requiring a human to touch them, then folks are not getting their care fast enough. And if the human is the challenge, then this is when we start to see the rise of AI. I was like, well, let's see if we can build an AI around this. And we took the approach to focus on payers, which is unique compared to a lot of other folks in the industry. A lot of folks decide to apply artificial intelligence to submitting a PA. We took the sort of other end of the coin, saying, hey, if we can do a better job of making decisions, it should make submitting prior authorizations a lot easier as well. So that was the thought process. But not being a technologist, not being a clinician, I knew we had to bring in some folks to support that. And that's where you come into what is actually the real work of a founder and a CEO, is building a team. And so fortunately brought in my co-founder and then CTO, and now our VP of Innovation, James Rollins. We brought in a clinical leadership, we brought in an AI leadership, and just the company started to grow. And we're very fortunate to be in the position we're in. We started right before the pandemic, and we found a way not to, I would say, survive the pandemic, and even though it's still ongoing. And then we're continuing to see some really rapid expansion today, which is exciting. And we're very, very fortunate to be in the position we're in.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. So for those of my business friends who are watching thinking, why are we doing a healthcare episode today? It's because Saar has this incredible background that he brings to the table, which is a tremendous amount of curiosity, problem solving, and he has been on the business side of it before. for. So I like to start off by asking kind of a big question because it gives people great perspective into what you're thinking about and where your focus is. If you and I were to speak 3 years from now and I call you up, oh my gosh, Brittany, it's so great to hear from you. I can't wait to tell you about what we've done in the last 3 years. What would you have accomplished personally, professionally that you would love to share?
I would love if we figured out a way to make this prior auth process truly collaborative and something where nobody views it as a pain point anymore. Jokingly when we started the company, I used to quote Salesforce. Used to quote it was the Romans. They had a saying called "Carthago delende est." Carthage must be destroyed. So Salesforce had one saying like CRM must be CRM delende est. So jokingly we used to say PA delende est, like we got to go destroy prior authorization. Mm-hmm. You're never going to get rid of prior auth in this. As long as you have a payer-based sort of managed care cycle, even in single payer systems, you see a version of prior authorization. So, but the truth is, what we really want to destroy isn't the prior authorization; it's the way we experience it. It shouldn't be as painful as it is. So, if we can truly accomplish it in 3 years, what I would love is we've got a provider-facing solution that is actually able to auto-read on the medical side, submit the prior authorization in accordance to the criteria that exist today, and also instantly be reviewed and provide feedback within 5 seconds or less to the provider and patient.
Incredible. To improve decision-making, hopefully tenfold. When you look at these different systems and this is like just me, the provider, and me wanting to know, even single payer systems, why can't we eliminate prior auth? And because it can't be eliminated, what's the purpose it's serving then? Because if it's that integrated.
So, well, you have to think about how do, basically the way you pay for healthcare, and the business of healthcare is actually pretty interesting. When you think about a doctor sees a patient, and then in the old days in pre-1930s, you had basically the doctor would charge the patient for that fee-for-service model. At some point, a group of doctors down in Texas said, hey, what if we create a subscription service? You guys go ahead. And this is around in Baylor, Texas. So what became originally the first Blue Plan was basically formed by this group of doctors. And they said, hey, you guys just pay us per month and you have unlimited access to our hospital. Literally like the subscription model in the 1930s for access to care. Mm-hmm. What they found out is, well, we've got this pile of money and we've got to make sure it stretches out for the entire year. And so this became what you got the primary analysis of what's called a total combined ratio in medicine, what today is called your MLR, medical loss ratio. So what is the premium dollars coming in? And then how are we spending that on premium dollars out for the care of the patient? So that's what a health plan has to manage to. The prior authorization then is to really make sure that the premium dollars going in are being used appropriately for care and also are not exceeding to that point. So that way the health plan doesn't run out of money. Because let's say if you have a medical loss ratio above 100, which you're seeing in a number of different health plans in the startup space for health insurance, you're spending more dollars on your care of your patients than you're charging them. That's not a sustainable business. Right. So what they're really targeting to, by law, the best medical loss ratio you're supposed to have is about 85 or 85 cents of every premium dollar should go towards the care of your patients. The remaining 15 cents is for your G&A and for potentially some profit, because at the end of the day, businesses need to be profitable. So that was really the crux of what is this model. The prior authorization then is to make sure that doctors are appropriately using therapies that are very specialized and costly. There's drugs out there that are extremely expensive. You have certain genetic therapies that cost upwards of $2 to $3 million. And that's a big hit for folks. There's even some drugs that are out there for infants. And now if you think about how does the care model work, and if this is a drug that's costing $200,000, of course you want the infant to receive this treatment, it's going to be cared, but you want to make sure it's being applied appropriately. And the thing is, you know as a provider, there's significant research out there for when certain therapies are appropriate. But the other truth you probably know as a provider, and even I know, is coming from family providers, not every doctor's paying attention to those studies. And they're defaulting back to their heuristics and their cognitive biases as for when they should be applying a therapy. And so for that reason, the health plan wants to enforce evidence-based guidelines. All the medical policies for a prior authorization have been reviewed by a medical review board. They're reviewing the evidence-based guidelines, and then they're making a actual policy around it to try and enforce the use of evidence-based medicine. The health plan's not being there like, oh, we want to hold on to all our money. We're going to say no to every single thing. they're literally just trying to make sure that doctors are following it. And in Massachusetts, which is actually a value-based care state, you would think that doctors would be encouraged to follow evidence-based guidelines. So there's actually an interesting study out there that one health plan, they had two populations, one where they had evidence-based guidelines prior authorization, and one which was the value-based care group. Shockingly, the group that was supposed to be incentivized by outcomes that are supported by evidence-based guidelines did not follow them unless there was a prior authorization. The population that had the PA had better outcomes than the population that didn't have PA. And that was one of those things where it's like, well, why do we have prior? This for this exact reason, because doctors are so busy. How often do we really get a doctor spend more than 10 minutes with us? And some people only get 5 minutes with their doc. And that's the thing, is they're so busy because they're dealing with so many different issues at once, and they're in decision fatigue as well. So how do you expect them to have time to keep up with every evidence-based guideline? And that's where the prior auth comes in. It comes up as a sort of a pause point where we can collaborate on care between payer and provider. The problem we're running into is doctor staffs are overwhelmed. There's a lot of payers. They don't have a lot of great sort of solidification of what criteria to apply. CVS criteria is going to be different than, Express Scripts criteria, different than Optum's criteria. So they're having to look at all the different criteria. And then the next point is they actually don't know when the criteria is updated. So like they could be using criteria from 10 years ago. And that turns into another challenge as well. And so the doctors are they're in the right point. Like, hey, this is creating a lot of burden for us. And if you really look at it, they're spending $32 billion a year to submit prior authorizations. And that is a huge expense to just look at it as an administrative process. So if we can come up with a better holistic process on PA, which is what Banjo is going for, it kind of comes down. So hopefully that answers your question, Brittany.
Oh my gosh, yes. And huge levels of efficiency. And if we can improve upon that loss that the providers are facing with, the work in billing and prior auth, then maybe that means better patient care.
Exactly. But we also want to be evidence-backed.
Right. No, I never thought about it as this kind of accountability measure, which you just described. I mean, that research is super powerful that you just quoted. But it makes so much sense when you think about the way that training is outlined for providers, that it's so intensive, so early. And then they kind of hit this like peak in their career and just stay there. What's the incentive to continue to, yes, they have to pass certain tests along the way and keep their licenses, but it's not the standard of care type learning that you're talking about. And it's super important.
Yeah, and I'll point back to imaging, right? So my wife is a physical therapist, and so the thing is, physical therapists can't order images. For them to then do their assessment, they're going to use different techniques, and actually without imaging, they can do a pretty good job assessing various things. Doctors are addicted to prescribing an MRI. That's going to cost a health plan $15,000 minimum per MRI. And so if every single MRI went through, you'd be looking at a massive expense. So usually the first thing they recommend as part of what's called step therapy is you have to fail physical therapy first. The amount of times that physical therapists are just able through what's basically called tensile touching, they'll actually test and then go through a mobility test. They can figure it out pretty quickly. Oh, you know what? You have a sprain, strain, you have a tear, you have et cetera. And they can actually go through without the need of an MRI to treat the patient. And that maybe will cost them about a fourth of what it costs for the MRI. And that's where you get into, are doctors actually able to go through? But you go back to the doctor's schedule. And do they have the time to develop that training? That's why a lot of doctors who are fresh out of medical school are better on that new standard of care than the doctor that's about 30 plus years into their career.
Completely. I live with that, so I totally understand. That is really remarkable example with the physical therapy thing. My father actually just went through that, and it's same thing. The physical therapist was right on. He wasn't making the kind of progress they were hoping for, so again went through the MRI, but the provider was exactly right with what the issue was. So really, really remarkable. I love obviously that you're using data to shape your AI. It makes a ton of sense. So we're talking about just the remarkable opportunity within this, but what do you define as the greatest opportunity for you guys in this space, or what you're working on?
Ideally, the greatest opportunity is to create the connection between the payer and provider and make it be seamless. If you can get back to an integrated care model where the dollars are also associated with the outcome, that'd be phenomenal. But to get there, you have to reconnect the provider and the payer and really the patient's behaviors. Also needs to look at the tertiary providers as well, your sites of care, your pharmacists, a number of other folks. So the way it really ends up boiling down is you have to create a connected ecosystem. But to do that, you have to make sure you have a broad technological footprint that also is able to be neutral and have a standardized and robust data set.
Right. Huge challenges there. So that's my next question, which is from the business side of it. What are the greatest challenges for you guys within that?
What do you mean by business challenges? Because that can mean a lot of different things.
Sure, completely fair question. To get to your greatest opportunity, right? The things there's things outside of your control. There's policy. There's things that you yourself cannot execute on single-handedly. So within the realm of Banjo, or what you see as within your scope of control, what are the challenges that you guys are currently working on or just identified to get you closer?
Great question. I think there's an awareness challenge as being a startup. So you have to have folks actually understand what you're doing. The way you get around that is you have to, continue to beat your own drum a little bit, which is unusual for, myself and my approach to business. But then the other part is you got to get other folks to start beating the drum. So we've got 5 customers. We need them to be evangelists of ours. We have 30 employees. We need them all to be evangelists of ours. We need to make sure that we're making enough noise that folks are hearing about us. So I think the one thing is getting the awareness out there. The other part's adoption. People have AI fatigue at this point. We've been hearing about AI, and at this point, it's come to a lot of health plans as well as the Skynet. Is it gonna, be the Terminator coming in, taking all my jobs, or is it, hey, does this AI really work? Because I've been hearing about AI now for the last 5 years, and I haven't seen money changes. So the truth is like you've got to get the awareness, you've got to get the adoption, and then you also have to get folks comfort, because if you go back to that Skynet thing, you've got people who are on the floor being like, is this going to take my job? Am I going to have a job after this? And so those are, I think, organizational change management, when you really think about how do these big organizations go through these big technological changes. And it's interesting challenges, and you've got folks who have different sets of experiences who know how to tackle them and are also having to innovate around newer nuances as well. Okay.
So what are you guys doing within the awareness space? Like, where do you find the challenges? Are people struggling to understand the concept, or is it just about needing the megaphone?
Sometimes you would think that we weren't speaking our client's language, right? We knew so much about our own solution that we almost over-engineered our communication. We're like, let's tell them everything. Let's just throw the entire sink, and they're going to say something in here is awesome, right? They got overwhelmed because it was just too much text talk. And we had to really figure out, how do we get that communication boiled down to what is their problem? What is the value proposition for them on a go-forward basis? And we're recognizing that we weren't the best at marketing. We decided to go and bring in a marketing team to really help out with this. And we've really started to challenge ourselves to basically say, hey, how does this work? You look at our logo, our branding, could use some work. So we're working with these teams to come up with a more professional brand. We're named Banjo Health. That's pretty whimsical, but having a big banjo right there next to the logo probably doesn't lend itself to hey, this is a high-tech, mature company. It probably is like, oh, are these a bunch of kids playing a banjo together? And so those were the other things that we were working with them. On the other side of it, you would ask like, hey, is it just getting the word out there? We've got a few different approaches you can have on direct selling, just kind of the smile and dial approach on inside sales. It doesn't work so well in B2B, but it still has to be done to actually keep the pipeline floating, keeping some pressure on the pipeline. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of it is just, you go out and we have discussions like this, what we're doing with you. And that helps us get our name out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Great answer. This is something that so many people that I talk to and that I work with face, right? Is that I know I'm so close to the problem. I'm in it, in the weeds all day long, that we forget to see it from our customers' point of view, right? What was one of the biggest gaps that you identified there? Obviously you're in the tech of it, right? And this is something that so many people I work with struggle with. They are technicians at heart, and it's a leap from your perspective or the way you have to operate, right, to jump into that CEO seat or into that sales seat. What helps you with that?
So I guess I have the benefit of not being an engineer by training, right? So I couldn't dive into whether we use like AWS or Azure. Like that discussion is gonna fly over my head. I pay the bill for that. That's the extent of it, right? I have to trust my team. The where I get into it is probably in the beginning. You had even commented like, "Wow, you had a really deep explanation." We have to learn how to simplify our communication. You've got 5 seconds or less to really catch somebody's interest, to get yourself the next 30 seconds, to get yourself to the next 2 minutes, to get yourself to the next 30 minutes. So to get somebody interested to want to spend the time, you have a very, very short window. And simplifying your communication, it's not about showing them how smart you are. It's about getting them curious to want to learn about what you can solve for them. And so how do you create that curiosity? And that's you've got to figure out what is actually the thing, that burning need for your target client at that time. And we know it because we used to live it. But the problem is that we also know all the other problems they're going through, that we did the mistakes in the beginning of, let me tell you how I solve all your problems, and we're a panacea. What we really should have done is like, oh, by the way, that medical policy, we've actually got a pretty nifty tool around that. Oh, let's learn more. And as we've actually really scaled back or simplified our communication, the pipeline's exploding. And that's really exciting to see. And we haven't even hit our marketing stride yet. Like the marketing team we hired, they just started 3 weeks ago. So they haven't had enough time to really catch up. So our own work in simplifying our communication is working. I can only imagine what's going to happen once they get also their work also starts to get involved.
Right. Super exciting. Right. Yeah. They say generally like 3 to 6 months to see that full stride hit. So that's really exciting. So you found that when you guys just keep dialing it back, keep chopping the words in half, like keep doing simplify, that's when you really felt like it started to resonate with customers. Yep. Okay. Very cool. So we just talked about some of the strategies or whatever that are working. What do you feel like, was there a moment for you where you kind of had this aha, like I call it an eye-opening moment, where it shifted the way that you saw what was going to make this thing work, or what was going to work in leading your team? That changed the way that you showed up from that.
We hired our COO. That was the big change moment in the entire company.
Okay.
Right. So when we hired Emiliano Leftoratos, he's formerly the CEO of a company called Metal, which got acquired by Ciox. He's been in industry for 40 plus years, so very, very experienced gentleman. He brought instantly a lot of maturity to the company. He challenged us to make sure that, did we really place our team in the best positions? Do we need to make sure we're recruiting from the right pools? And the level of play in the company is just exciting to see right now, because the experience that he brought in, now it's gone from really startup, in my opinion, to an early stage scale up at this point in time. And that was the biggest moment. And that happened, and could only have happened as part of our Series A fundraise when we did that, because the introduction actually came from a prospective investor who was thinking about investing. And so the two of us connected that way. So really, he's been a huge asset to the entire organization.
Great. And so tell me about, how do you two come together and have these powerful conversations? I've seen a lot of founders maybe struggle to take that outside advice, or, from someone who's new. What helps you guys just work together so well?
Yeah, and I apologize for the background noise. So, it was a struggle to actually I knew I should hire him. So I already made a decision in my head. But I also knew that I've got an ex-CEO right there, and my board can be, and right now we just brought in outside investors who may or may not be friendly. So I've got an ex-CEO, proven with an exit, proven with 42 exits before that exit. So he's had 43 M&A events in his career.
Oh my
so
gosh.
I'm literally staring down a proven legend as a CEO. It's like, why they're going to come back to the question, Saar, should he take the seat, or should you step back, right? But the truth of the matter is he brings a different set of experiences than I do. And we have a way to lean on each other. And we've had a really good chemistry from the beginning. Just very, very similar sort of mindsets, very growth oriented, wanting to do what's best for the overall organization. It's never been, me before we. It's always been we. And I've been really fortunate to have attracted great talent in that way, that has a collaborative growth mindset, doesn't worry about the title, knows that we're all going to make our fair stake. So, and I think that also goes back to my attitude of, if I'm eating, the rest of my team should be eating too. I've always had that sort of leaders eat last mentality, which I think helps attract other rock stars, because they also appreciate that. They recognize that their leader is going to make sure they do well before he does well.
Mhm. I'm so glad you brought that up because that is such a relevant conversation point right now. Everyone is looking at this like talent war and trying to figure out, well, how do I attract and retain the best people? What, and now you're talking about a mindset that is a leaders eat last, give, and just share really. What else, if you got into the specifics of that, because some people like to say, oh, we're just lucky or whatever, but there are actual things you're doing behind that. Maybe you don't even consciously recognize. But we've talked about this a little bit on our pre-call. What is it you are looking for, or how are you recruiting? What are you actually doing when you have to, really objectively pull that out?
Yeah, so at Banjo, we have a 3-part framework for how we assess any prospect coming in. So we look at skills, will, and fit. So there's a job, there's going to take certain skills to do that job. I'm not looking to see if they have the potential to do that job. No, are they able to do that job today? As a startup, we don't have the benefit of being a development organization. Time is against us. We're dealing with a cash burn. We know that in X number of months, we're going to run out of money. So the person we're hiring has to be able to do the job today. Guess what that means? They're probably more expensive. But that's okay, because if they have the skills, the job gets done and the milestones met, and you're able to either achieve more funding or achieve enough revenue that you have additional funding. The question, another thing is, do they have the will to do it? Do they actually want to do the job? I will tell you, there's so many people that have done a particular job and they did it well. They're burnt out from it, and they're looking for either a different challenge or they're looking for just something altogether different, right? They're just done. They don't, like, take, for example, looking for somebody in IT security for healthcare. There's people who have drafted those policies and they don't ever want to draft another policy again. I'm sorry, if you don't have the wills to go draft a policy, you're not a fit for what we need, and you're not going to meet the need for Banjo. So you have to really want to do it. And what's interesting is there's a lot of people that have the will, they don't have the skill, and that's what we call potential. And a lot of founders get stuck in that space where they're going to go ahead and be like, oh my God, they really want to do it. They kind of sort of can do it. But the trap you're going to run into is it's the potential trap. And you need somebody who can do that job today and they want to do that job today. The final piece of that puzzle is fit. What is this culture you're building? What do you want this team to feel like, look like, do? And I point a lot back to college athletics, because really, if you look at it in college athletics, you have I guess now with the NIL, things have changed, but it used to be that, players couldn't get paid. So when you're recruiting these players in, they're coming in for a few different reasons, right? They might be coming in for an education. They might be coming in for playing with other great players. They might be coming in for, in the case of Ohio State, my alma mater, they talk about the brotherhood and their football team. So it's like, are they going to fit the brotherhood? Are they going to be somebody who's going to be we before me? And that's really what you want to start to look at. So what we look at Banjo Health, what is our culture? First principle is discipline. We want people who want to be ready to do that 25-mile march every single day. Nothing more, nothing less. It's raining. It's okay. We got to march 25 miles. I'm sick. I got to march 25 miles. It's really sunny outside. I kind of feel like marching 50 miles. No, we're going to march 25 miles. And so it's, yes, you kind of do it, but having that discipline, that rigor, and knowing exactly what you're working on is going to ensure longevity. And it's part of the reason why I think we survived the pandemic, whereas a number of different startups didn't. The other part's courage. Are you going to be brave enough to, recognize that you're scared, but also just keep pushing forward? Are you going to have the courage to tell people when you disagree in a professional manner, but then also have the courage to disagree and commit on the direction that was chosen? It's hard to do that, because then there's this point where your ego comes in, especially when you think I'm right, the boss is wrong, but the boss chose this way even after hearing me out. And we've seen this even inside of Banjo. Folks don't commit and they're no longer a fit, right? Go back to skills, will, fit. And so if they're no longer a fit, you have to make that decision. That's also another hard decision we can come back to. Then you have service. You have to remember who you're actually in there to do this for. We went back to what is the big goal in 3 years? Prior auth delende est. We want to destroy prior authorization as we know it. And so if that's the case, you have to really make sure people understand what we're doing this at the end of the day for is a service to the patient. We really want patients to get onto the appropriate care and therapy in a timely fashion. And then finally, spirit. We want to have fun when we do this. Startup sucks. It's it hurts. Right? I have on my board my personal saying, pain is mandatory, suffering is optional. So you want people to have fun while you're doing it, because if you don't have a good attitude, you're going to make the suffering not optional. You're going to think it's mandatory as well. So you want that same spirit. You want people to be really collaborative and want to work together. So that became the sort of foundational elements of our culture right there. And when we go for that fit, we're looking at that. One thing that threatens the entire part of those 4 pillars is ego. And so recognize this about myself, I recognize this about other folks, is that ego can be a huge limitation in your professional, in your personal, in any of your progress. And I'm not talking about ego in the Freudian sense of the id or anything. I'm talking about, I'm the best, I got this, like I can do that. It's fine to have confidence. It's another thing to think I'm right, they're wrong because I'm smarter.
Right.
I'm better at this particular skill set, so I should have the title, not this person. It's the same way going back to hiring a guy with 43 M&A events to come in and be our COO. Put your ego aside and actually be willing to trust and listen to people's experiences, being collaborative with them. So we make everybody read this book called Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. And what that book does a great job of doing in its broader sense is it outlines to you at every single step where you might be in your life, whether you're aspiring, while you're currently succeeding, or if you're on your downside, how ego can harm you and how it can actually then harm the team. And it's been a great way for us to also weed out who's going to fit our culture. So going back to skills, wills, fit, what are the four premises of our culture, and then how do we encapsulate it? That's what's really enabled us to recruit amazing talent. And rock stars attract rock stars. Emil is the guy who attracted our head of data science, Shannon Fee, our head of product, Vanessa Chang. It's a network effect because now they started recruiting out of their pools, and they've actually been able to bring other rock stars. From there, just folks have heard about what we're doing, and they'll come to an interview and be like, oh my God, this team is amazing. I want to be part of it. And it creates a buzz. So I hear a lot as a CEO about, oh my God, it's so hard to hire. I'm not experiencing it personally. So I'm confused when I'm hearing about it. It's like, but then I come back to like what we've done is we've built out this foundation of a culture for perpetual success.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I can feel from you, like you guys have this ethos, you have this like credo that you live. And I can tell because of how smoothly you talk about it. It's something that you are definitely accessing all the time to be able to talk about it so succinctly.
It's energizing to work with a team committed to excellence.
Right. Right. Completely. And it drives you, right, to access more and more of your potential and to rise up. And once you have really that going on for everybody, I mean, it just elevates everyone. Now, one reason why I do this show is to talk about how things are less than perfect. And that's challenging sometimes. But for those people who are struggling with that, who are struggling to create that buzz, or if they already have a team of 30 people and they didn't hire it this way, how do they start to drive the culture? So what is either inside of this whole process, something that you guys are still trying to nail or isn't perfectly working for you? Either give us some insight there or maybe talk us through what is something somebody with an existing team can do that has been most powerful for you guys.
So I'll start back with my personal mantra: pain is mandatory, suffering is optional. This stuff is hard in the sort of emotional sense of it, right? Like you have to make a lot of decisions. There's a lot of people trusting you. Their eyes are on you. They're judging you. They're not judging you. You don't know. Mm-hmm. And the number one thing I will tell everybody is breathe. Take a deep breath, calm down. Mm-hmm. It's gonna be okay. You're going to make mistakes. Just accept it. You're going to make a ton of mistakes. I did in the entire company, and I will continue to make mistakes. We'll learn and we'll bounce together and things will be fine. We're going to make things better, right? So as long as you're committed and you have those principles that you can lean on, I think that's the number one thing is once you've identified those principles, constantly reevaluate if they're fitting, but don't stray. When you use those as your anchor for how you make decisions going forward. And if you're not holding yourself accountable to those principles, that's part of you'll get into the struggle. And so I think you have your personal principles that you want to stick to. You're going to have your corporate principles. The two should, be aligned in some way or setting. Like I can't say I'm disciplined on my company, but then I'm lazy personally. It's not going to work. I can't lead that type of company then. Right. So there's certain principles that have to translate across. But I think when you have principled leadership internally, being your internal leader, but also principled leadership externally, it really will help you succeed. Is everything perfect? No. So when things aren't perfect, you have to ask yourself why. Is it your judgment of it, or is it objectively not perfect? And what can you do about it? And if you ask yourself objectively what's going on, oftentimes you'll find out that there's minor tweaks you can do. There's a tough conversation you need to have that you've been avoiding. And you just kind of have to bite the bullet and have that tough conversation. And those things can actually bring a huge relief. I can say, actually, this week we had a tough conversation. It was the best sleep I'd gotten in 2 weeks because it was something that was racking my brain. So it was, oftentimes it's just that one tough conversation you got to have with folks and really hold yourself and your team accountable. The other thing is, if you're going to hold your team accountable, you better be holding yourself accountable. It's hard for folks to want to follow a leader that doesn't hold themselves accountable. And so that's part of the reason why you've kind of got to bring it every day, which is tiring, which means you've also got to know when to take a break. Some people are just like really on all the time, and that's I'm personally guilty of it. That'll lead to burnout. That'll lead to like other major issues that can harm the company in the long term. So, going back to just how do I sum it up simply? Take a breath. Now go back to your first principles. From there, go and apply it. And also don't be afraid to have any hard conversations.
So awesome. Thank you so much for diving into that. What's so encouraging about it, I find, is that no matter where you're at, you have the opportunity to come back to you as the leader and make an impact there. First, starting, with driving your own discipline and behaviors and principles, and then, speaking them into the organization. So it's encouraging because when we realize, oh, that's within my control, then we can start to make a change immediately.
Definitely.
It's needed. Yeah. It has been so eye-opening to chat with you. You really have a great perspective on things and are so great at speaking them into the space. So thank you guys so much for the work you're doing. I'm so excited to see this change in my lifetime with prior authorizations, especially before I get old and sick. So thank you for that. And how can people find you if they have questions, if they want to share your work? What's the best way for people to do that?
Yeah, I'm almost always on email. So my first name, Saar, SAAR, @banjohealth.com is always the best way to get a hold of me. I would say come take a look at our website, but as I mentioned, our marketing is all in the process. So you can go on there. If you want to track the changes, go ahead. But that's the best way. I'm on LinkedIn. So these days, so if that's another way you would like to connect, I'm available there as well.
Awesome. I'll make sure all of those links are in the show notes and on the live so that people can see it.
Well, thank you, Brittany, for having me. This has been a great conversation, and I appreciate it.
Awesome. And goodbye to everyone for now, and thanks for joining us.